Good afternoon. This is October 7th, and I will be starting a new a new dimension. For those who have known me for this last few days and or months, or ever since I started in the use of in the oral form, image form, since Chinese New Year this last February, and in this particular segment is also a little bit reflecting on the various grouping or the focus I had. First, I started the CCI Cross Cultural Institute since 1977. Is when I left the university, coming into the private business of the gemstones, minerals, and very much linked to Brazil. I take this last 45 years of my business engagement and the global engagement is a part of the enculturation, EN, okay, educating myself with a much richer life experience than the academia, even though I have created the system of the counseling called 3C, communication dynamics, communication analytica, and the most important aspect is the middle, where I created the cultural spheres, singular. But with time, these cultural spheres have further very much more evolved and expanded. Is part of the way, maybe from a Chinese point of view, without me knowing it, or subconsciously, you folks should know and think about the Chinese word Hakka, Hakka. Literally, it means Hak is visitor, Ga is family. In other words, I was starting my journey early on, cross-culturally, from the Shanghai birthplace to the Cantonese Macau, Hong Kong, and then from the Cantonese region in Macau, where I've learned English, Latin, and Greek, that created the base to move me into another cultural sphere in 62, coming into Brazil. And indeed, Brazil had opened up any teenager's mind, or from the 40 plus days of journey from Asia into South America, Latin America, crossing over the Indian Ocean into the east coast of Africa, stopping in Mozambique, Lorenzo Marques, the city, to they call Maputo, and then coming down to Port Elizabeth, Durban, Cape Town, crossing the Atlantic. And the other impressive time is that we rescued the scientists in the island called Tristan da Cunha, which is directly almost halfway between Africa and Brazil. And that's why all the reading, as I'm going through with some of the books that I'm reading, written by Mascarenhas Barreto, who put Columbus, it's a Portuguese Columbus, with the espionage, with the mission, aiding Portugal, King John, and to set up the Spanish discovery into the Caribbean, into the Americas, which in fact, from the books, from this part of storytelling, that the Portuguese already in the 1460s already had gone all the way down to Ghana by traveling coastal, a little bit at a time, had not the chance to turn of the Cape of Good Hope. But they have already have an outpost in Tristan da Cunha and connecting, knowing the existence of the continent of Brazil. So whatever, this not to off the subject, but the emphasis that where I have created this cultural sphere, reflecting back when I was a youngster, if that particular household, be that in São Paulo, Brazil, more so in Brazil, and in Macau, when the table can be speaking Shanghai, Mandarin, or Cantonese of the mahjong table, which my mother and my aunts and how they entertain themselves during those years. So those cultural spheres are the linguistic spheres. And much richer this cultural sphere when we have as immigrants arriving into Brazil and to this magnificent city of São Paulo. But I can only speaking from my experience in the region, in the cultural sphere where my father had our house, in the area called Jardim América, means American Garden. And for those international folks who have lived in São Paulo, Brazil, or in the era 62 to 67, it used to be known the Época de Ouro. It's one of the most affluent, is also one of the richest time of São Paulo, Brazil. We can count, or we can imagine, we can experience the living standards. Just talk about the house in the region and the size and the styling. Case in point, I met one of the grandchildren of the famous Italian magnate industrialist at that time in São Paulo. The family is known as the Matarazzo. The entire home and houses of the children were built with the marbles from Carrara, from Italy. Imagine that. And that the house I was in with this youngster, I can remember one day to another, we were basically roller skating, throwing ball in the house. The first floor alone is over 7,000 square feet. And within 30 days' time, the entire square footage of that home and upstairs were totally carpeted by a fellow Lebanese that we have come to know. And so the dimension, the size, the opulence, I mean, it was very not so much about a status quo, because when you're younger, you know, well, this is all the big houses and big homes, and people have servants, have maids, and have drivers, so on and so forth. And plus, in that region, we had Jardim América, we had Jardim Europa, where I go to school, taking the tram, maybe 2 or 3 kilometers down, heading direction at the end of the Jardim Europa to the right on Rua Avenida Iguatemi, where you find the Jardim Paulistano. And then from Jardim Paulistano, going back further to the direction of right, that's the Pinheiros, the neighborhood, Rebouças, coming up from back to our region. The main street is called Rua Augusta. Well, this was a big shopping center. You can equate today in Chicago, Michigan, or Fifth Avenue in New York, whatsoever. But it was for me, it's very tranquil. It's very basic. And by using my cultural sphere, now, who's to know, we might be able creating a cultural sphere just called São Paulo, Brazil, 1960s. And the people who live in the area will share the very, very much of the surroundings. And first of all, there was no supermarkets, but almost in every single week, my mother, the maid, sometimes I forced to be to accompany, like many early on, pick up the Brazilian male machismo. Well, we don't do chores, but nevertheless, because of our household, mother's limited in language, and there's almost every day of the week, there will be beautiful, beautiful fairs on the streets. And that, looking back and also revisiting myself today, back to São Paulo, those are the very glorious, gorgeous cultural exchanges. So I will start this particular cultural sphere, and you can put the name on top of it. Rua Augusta, Jardim Europa, Rua Estados Unidos. You can use by streets, so people can come in and have input and speak of our nostalgia. Well, speaking of nostalgia, there's no other Portuguese language can better say about saudades. meaning missing, with a lot of love, affection, passion, compassion. So in what I have developed, the cultural spheres in the CCI, Cross-Cultural Institute, in the development of the 3 Cs, and now we're coming to the psychology of round and square, and into the passage of the pedagogy of conscience. In all this passage, which I relating back to academia, and then ultimately conscience, to make it very simple, not to put into an elitist kind of mode. Conscience cannot be learned. Conscience just telling us to think more, to think better, to think of others other than just us. And maybe perhaps part of the language inspiration, the tonality, going back to Shanghai, Macau, Hong Kong, Brazil, where the Latin roots, the linguistic expansion, knowingly or not, have amplified my engagement with the Latin and Romance language. So if you go to my website, paulyih.ai, you will see the creation of the linguistic group called Romantina / Romancina. Again, this is part of the input where I think I can help the many, many Chinese who are engaged in a foreign language, along with the Chinese widening presence around the globe. And my business for 45 years has started at the same time when China, immediately after Deng Xiaoping's announcement from Shenzhen. In fact, I took my wife and my mother-in-law in the early 80s when I opened up our business in Palm Beach, Le Gem, with the Bernie Brother Bakers, my partner from Chicago. And Shenzhen was a village, nothing else. Today, Shenzhen, across the border from Hong Kong, Kowloon, is 22 million and is the brain center of the AI and the modern era. And so in this development, which I call it maybe partially, I was very fortunate to see my business riding side by side with the Chinese opening into the global economy by the creation, the audacity of Deng Xiaoping. It's no longer a country being shut down, closed down by their own personal regimes. I mean, this is a lot of debates going on about communism, socialism, and that will be another expansion on the topic about how China and Russia split. From a simple topic this morning, I just started to think and write about when India, 2 years before Nehru died, had gone into China, starting a war, taking claim of the land in the Chinese region of Tibet. It is. Tibet was still an autonomous region. Many of the West would think China is overpower both Tibet and Xinjiang. Well, this is the narrative, quote unquote, of the freedom, thriving West and demonizing the Chinese hegemony. But in fact, talk about the word hegemony that we will look into more introspectively and reflectively using our conscience, that when the US having the hegemony in the exercise of the Monroe Doctrine, where I was in part of this time realizing, seeing the trouble of the military regimes in Latin America and their empowerment by the American school. Basically, we talk about the School of America and the military regimes in all part of Latin America, starting by the Banana Republic, which the American created, called Guatemala. And the US sent troops to Guatemala for no other reasons but the workers in the Banana Republic, so-called by the Americans, only seeking a slightly a raise of the salary of 50 cents per day. And for that, the regime was totally overthrown. and put in by strong arm men. And one by one, 73, Chile, Allende. We talk about the military regime in Argentina and into South America in general. And 64, basically, the Brazilian João Goulart get overthrown. I was in a boarding school. We seen the tanks, so on and so forth, all the other maneuverability, because in the city where I went to school in Lorena, between São Paulo and Rio, it's a region was the strong Brazilians military stronghold, training from gun. In fact, my school, Colégio São Joaquim, was once a military school donated by the nobleman to the Salesians, and to provide such a great education I've received in Lorena. But all in all, I think by speaking about cultural sphere, many of you can start it with the same topic. São Paulo is so huge, or New York is so large. You have Bronx, you have Manhattan, you have Central Park, you have all the suburbs. And likewise, in São Paulo, where I felt very lucky to have lived in a very prestigious, very peaceful, big houses, big homes in the area called Jardim America, where other my friends I went to school with living in Moca, living in Barra Funda, living in the area called Pacaembu. We talk about suburbs. Imagine how much of this neighborhood story can be retold if we put in just a zone, Pacaembu, 60s to 70s. I hope this will open up a richer to the social media and to the regional content and the common dishes. I just posted on Facebook yesterday, in the use of ChatGPT, I'm using almost a referral, they're congregating my bits and pieces, the assembly of memory of Brazil. When we were, at the time, we have just pick a number, over 3,000 Italian restaurants in the city of São Paulo. My father took us dining in Conjunto Nacional, which is a building hosting the cinema called Cine Astor. And inside, one of the best Brazilian, Italian descent, of course, restaurant called Fasano. And in this context, okay, even I'm Googling trattoria, pizzeria, up until about a year and a half ago, we were just commenting about trattoria. How come those trattorias are vanishing? You don't hear that in Italy or São Paulo, Brazil. Again, here's my hands, right? A part of that is I grew up with the Italians. I grew up with the priests in Macau. I grew up with the many Italian instructors, teachers, also in Brazil and in my boarding school, Lorena. Trattoria, by my personal perception, were the regional, the good cooks, home cooking. The chef is none other but mama themselves. They may make the best of the sauce, and so they become known. It's much more intimate, a family restaurant, than just a pizzeria. Today, I go back to São Paulo, I still being invited to restaurants like Fasano. But in my era, in my time of teenagers, I have taken date going to the restaurant called Hungaria, which is Hungarian, with the gypsy music, violin, very entertaining. 2 blocks behind me, living on the street called Bela Sintra, intercepting in the whole Estados Unidos, meaning United States. Next to us is Hot Dog Lobo, where today the best Paulista Brazilian churrascaria, which is the barbecue, is becoming one of the top restaurant in terms of meats. So in my area, 3 blocks away, I swam for the club called Jardim Paulistano, and also later with Hebraica in the region called Jardim Paulistano. And then down to the end of Jardim Europa, today's the big shopping center, Shopping Iguatemi, is the Clube Pinheiros. So all this is just very, very sweet memories, because when you're at a certain age, I don't think all immigrants have my experience. And I have much sympathy for those who may not have the same opportunity that I had, or I have managed to live in a very diverse, not necessarily in the opulence or the affluence I just mentioned, the Persian rugs, the big marble homes of the Matarazzos, and all the neighbors. In my own home, in my house, to our right, lived a German with 6 Dobermans. And right behind me, next to our house, is a group of the Hasidic Jews who came from Shanghai. And to our own chagrin, my brother and I was talking to each other in Cantonese and in the yard, and every now and then we come up with a couple vulgar Cantonese. And all of a sudden, over the fence, and say, "Hey, little boys, what's your language?" In fluent Cantonese. And then later on, we find out they were the family who came from Shanghai. At the one time, the ice cream factory in Shanghai called Snow White was owned by these Hasidic Jews. Well, people, you have to understand the part of the Shanghai. Even though I have seldom set foot because my own chagrin with England or with the open trade, but I was born 2 blocks behind the Peace Hotel. The Peace Hotel, before it's known as the Peace Hotel, is the hotel for the Sassoons. Sassoons and the Rothschilds are the 2 major families who supported or backed, working together with the UK, with the British, and with the East Indian Company, and who also helped to colonize both India and China. And it just tells you the complexity of the city, which is very rich. And I have seen my neighbor's full German uniform in the case. He was a colonel in the Third Reich. But we did not have any particular plus or minus images. And all we know that he has 8 Dobermans around the house, and is a very quiet, very, very severe, very serious man, but very pleasant in greeting. But what I'm trying to say about this cultural spheres of the cities and suburbs and neighborhoods, someday we can talk about a neighborhood in Mexico City. We're going to like Peru. When I travel through Miraflores in the region of the Peruvian city. And I hope in the development of the CCI holds, each case is a sphere, which one is a particular, the Brazilian community I have lived. And so this is part of the extremely rich development when you're in the clusters of culture. And a typical youngster's day, my mother would never knew if I have swimming meets or swimming practice, which I do practice in the summer, 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning, and then repeat 3 in the afternoon. So in that time and period, and sometimes we do have evening meets, competitions. Either we compete, or some of the colleagues, some of the friends will be competing. So our social schedule is extremely diverse, extremely limited, and sometimes you have to tell some not so true stories just to let the Chinese mother let us get away. But all in all of this, speaking about Brazil, speaking of how we started in Brazil in 1962, and then my father were in Brazil in 1952. All I remember is that when I came to Macau and Hong Kong as an infant, after I was born in Shanghai, and then my mother could not have milk for me, so we took a wet nurse, and I stayed behind with my paternal grandmother for the first 5 years. Father had already departed into Brazil. And even now, I'm making some of the conjectures. I have a high admiration of my father, and my association, even his 10, 12-year absence in Macau, that all I can imagine is that in every room where we dedicated to be like a mini library, the plenty of books in Macau, and later on in Brazil, our house on top of garage is a full library. And the volume of books in multi-languages, definitely in French and English, and from the French literature upbringing and his fluency. In fact, my father and one of the Chinese known French translator, Fule, and my father were schoolmates in Paris and they shared the flat when they were in Shanghai. And Fule is known to the Chinese French-speaking translator, writer, and then his son, Fu Cong, later become a pianist, taking fame in Poland, in Europe, and defected from mainland China. And these are the family relations. And to add to these characters and images, the historical figures, one of the major figures who also moved to Brazil in the same period was the Chinese best painter, Zhang Daqian, where they moved to an area which agricultural is a little bit more remote, but no more than 2 hours, an hour and a half, in a city called Mogi das Cruzes, on the direction slightly going northeast to the shorelines into the direction to Rio de Janeiro, and where our family friend also have other farm raising egg farms that eventually become a good size colonial group of the Chinese surrounding the beautiful garden that this painter Zhang Daqian had created, called the Garden of the Eight Virtues. And I have also experienced at that particular time, between 62 of our arrival until I depart in 67, where I spent many times in the summer and weekends, long weekends, to that part of Mogi das Cruzes, in the direction 18 kilometers into a little town called Capella, this chapel. And also this particular time, learning visually, non-verbally, is where I first acquired how Zhang had created his latest splash ink, but in color. We have in possession one of the paintings, but how I have acquired the painting is another story. But where we were youngsters, with this huge cultural gaps of the Chinese and the visitors and another famous photographer called Lang Jingsan, and the gathering of this people, usually with my mother, my father's presence, and other Chinese friends and groups who know each other since the days in Shanghai. In fact, one of my half brother, was born into Zhang Daqian's brother in Sichuan. This brother's Chinese name is Chuan, is because out of the respect, the recognition of the region. We all using our first name, born in the city. My first name is Fung, which meaning the Xiao Feng. That Feng is Shanghai, which is part of the major character of the HSBC. HSBC is called, Shanghai and Hong Kong Bank. The lettering representing Shanghai is Feng, Fung. Okay. And I would talk about more specifically about the how I experience visually the color change of Zhang Daqian. That will alone will be also belong to this segment of the Brazil 1, 2, or 3 versions. But one of the many stories, I have to be making the conjecture to formulate how my father got to Brazil, how and when, and there will be other way to explore to just authenticate what my hypothesis was. I never realized that my father and his two associates, one is from Burma, Mr. Shi, or history. The other one, Mr. Lim. Mr. Shi is a gentleman from Burma. And Ling is a Chinese from Thailand. They're all ethnic Chinese, but they're all educated in Sorbonne in Paris. And all three of them have their one time so-called good life. I call it bon vivant at that time, with the mission. My dad's mission is following the Chinese national mission to send Chinese post-war, post the humiliation by the 8 nations who have devastated China. But with the same pain, China had to send scholars all over, to Germany, to Russia, to Japan, to the military schools. Chiang Kai-shek was one of the graduates from Japan. And Deng Xiaoping also went to Paris at that time. And my dad, Zhou Enlai, was in Paris. And others had gone to Germany. I believe a General Zhu De and others. And my other uncles had gone into University of Chicago. I call them uncles, just friends of my dad who came to the US to learn about banking, economics. But my father's choice was to be in Paris. I do not have my best relationship with my dad for the longest time. And that's why I command my 4-5 Latin languages, but not French. I can always read. Today with Google Translate, with other formats, reading French have never been an obstacle, for me, but it's just enriched by the more reading and more stuff. But my father had taken twice the Trans-Siberian Railway, which is starting from Shanghai, I believe, trusting to gone up to Harbin went up to Vladivostok, and then from going all the way west through Moscow, Berlin, and eventually landed into Paris. Some of the exchange between my father and I during my last many years of travel, when we're talking about liking sweets, okay, and we talk about having the wonderful sweet taste of the cakes and whatnot, and I was just mentioning, well, I appreciate more of the Austrian pastry in Vienna, the cafe, and the Arabic Arabic coffee that I enjoy, cherish far more than Germany. And my father just said it very likely. Oh, nowadays weekends we go up to Germany, we go up to Austria for cafe. Indeed, he said, well, I agree with you. The sweet taste in Switzerland and in Austria is less sweet, and the cream also less heavy. Well, I can imagine during his school days, their travel, their exposure, and the three of them after the war, to cut it short. And the reason I'm saying about this aspect of different bits and pieces of the history, and often will have to be authenticated by my family, by my sisters who are 7 years older. And that is the composing, remaking this story, and to verify how much that is true, had given me resolving some of the question mark in my head. My father, because of the command of French fluency and command of English, reading skill, speaking, maybe not as a high percentage, maybe 40% that my father can read, is where my father had succeeded, other than his own business in Shanghai during the wartime. But at a time when the Chinese communists, when Mao and Chiang Kai-shek were bitterly at war at each other, but had made a short duration and concession to join together to fight the Japanese. And this is where, just by a very quick comment from a distant a young man whose father and my father were friends, and trying to tell me that, Paul, you don't even realize how much your father have contributed to the time of war. I said, what story? Well, this story is still being explored, but I verify about 60% of the validity of it. And that given time, the U.S. were supplying clandestinely to the China with stainless steel, and the export were coming out of the port of Seattle. But at the same time, that was before Roosevelt or before Pearl Harbor had declared war to the Japanese. The Americans basically were in violation to have supplied China with stainless steel. And in this situation involving my mother's side, where my mother coming from the Guangxi, which is the southwest province next to Guangdong, and where this particular division, before a warlord state, come up with the two of the generals, Li Zhongyuan and Bai Songqi. This is called the Gui unit. And my father's first wife was also, he became widowed by the birth of the third child, I got a number 3 brother. And during that time, my father remarried from my mother, which are from the same region of his first wife, also we are originally Cantonese from the mother's side. And my maternal grandmother is a magistrate who smoked opium. He is one of the lords sent by the Qing rulers. So that is another factor of the I won't call it affluence or wealth, but we were not people of any lower ranking. And because my mother's linkage to the two group of the General Bai and General Li, and I trust that my father is working under the unit when combining the unity between the communists and the nationalists, working together in Shanghai, where my father had always been based before he went to Paris and afterwards. And is one of the major contribution my father had was that in any given time, the Japanese had cut through the coding system, the message by telegraph, for whatever reason, had caught the Chinese were buying stainless steel from the US. When that got caught, the supply got cut off. And this is where I was told the talents and the skills of language come into good use. Why they were hesitating, questioning what other mechanism they can develop and to continue the supply of the stainless steel coming out from Seattle, US. By what I was told, and this is where the brilliance at the right time, at the right moment, the right intelligence, my father had decided in the use of his 2 partners in Thailand, in Burma, or their group who were very well French schooled, had connected back to their schoolmates who happened to be Lebanese. Also, their families in Paris and other had gone back to Lebanon. From Lebanon, they had transmitted the messages by telex, telegram, and from Lebanon, transmitting to the relatives in Seattle. So the supply of the steel continued, but continue regardless the message or transmission. It can be in French, it can be in Arabic, or it also can be in Aramaic. And that business continued. And because of the continuation and the supply of steel, many of the other warlords in China are all going after for the supply of steel, because they will also receive supplement and subsidiary from the central government to build weapons and arms. And that is why my longest puzzle is that since my dad had been part of the effort to fight the Japanese, when that war, the Sino-Japanese War stopped, why my dad wanted to leave China. And the house we have in Shanghai behind the Peace Hotel, up until 10, 15 years ago, is still having 8 families living in it. And the reason I'm searching for this little bubble puzzle in bits and pieces is because maybe my mother's linkage to the warlords of the Li and Bai, and they eventually went to Taiwan. So life, sometimes it is full of mystery, but in search to put these puzzles together, not into a mystery, you can always develop also a fiction of the story. So in my years of not getting well with my dad, I'm the youngest of 7. Of course, I don't see how much his energy can left in working, not knowing my last 4 years and my accomplishment in Brazil with my schooling, with my swimming, as a record breaking. I have said in the other segment, I swam next to Mark Spitz in 1965. And I was invited to be the Brazilian Olympic team in '68, but I was not a citizen. We just got there in '62, and I broke my record in '64, 50-meter breaststroke with a club, a Jewish club called Hebraica. Again, it's another cultural zone that we're so accustomed to walk into a table. The table can speak in Yiddish. This table can speak Hungarian. Most of my friends were Hungarian. Jewish people from Budapest, and then this is German, there's English, all region. And you're not shocked. You saying goodbye to grandma, saying goodbye to mom in their own language. We wave. So the crossing over the cultural zone without feeling excluded or alienated, it's a very, very handy in this multicultural, multilinguistic world of São Paulo. And with a Chinese group, we know who and what is what. I never want to go to the American school called chapel, which was by the Felicians nuns. I found it to be obnoxious. I found it to be arrogant, even as much I love my Salesians from the Italian side. And many of the Chinese wanted to go to the American school because they can continue their schooling. I did come to college, but I never wanted to be engaged with American school, because in my Brazilian way of life is far much richer, far more cultural, and far more diverse. But in living as a teenager, in one good Saturday night, yes, the Chinese are coming, or the other Chinese migrating. Mom and dad, we were told to go to dinner, which we don't mind. It's a good dinner table, 10, 12 people, 2 table, 8, 9 courses. The minute the dinner's almost over, we can be eyeing the other Chinese teenager, like my friends Peter Liu, Charlie Mao, who's the son of the council, that we already had our program in mind to go to an American party. To go to an American party has many advantages. First of all, well, I don't drink, but for the teenagers who are starting at that puberty, alcohol was part of the attraction, but there's plenty available. And second attraction were in the school, at that time, the 2 major American schools, the graded high school in Morumbi and the American Chapel School in Chacra Flora. And there's always one group, one band, a Brazilian linked to the 2 schools. The minute the sound of the music coming out from Beatles or the Monkees or whoever, the Beach Boys, they will be able to play many tunes on the weekend, on the Friday or Saturday. So part of the attraction to go to an American party, they have the booze, they have the music, and then also, I personally love it because by 10 o'clock, we get the hell out of the party. Then I go to my Brazilian, is it when the time where the young lady I was dating, Ana Maria Murari, was just getting ready. And our party starting about 10, 10:30 and goes into 1, 2 in the morning. Of course, with all this multicultural entertainment, multicultural attraction, and multicultural, including food, starting with the Chinese, booze, liquor, music with the Americans, and the ending in late night with the Brazilians. And sometimes we even took the risk of the punishment by the parents. After 1:30 in the morning, we decided, hell, I already violated my household rule. Let's drive to Santos, which an hour and a half away. We go to the shores to watch the sunrise. In a way, I can think about all the little books we read: Tom Brown's School Days, Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, and all the teeny, and of course, the omnipresence is the monkey. But the diversity in Brazil, who can afford not to falling in love with the warm people, with the warm hugs and tugs? And when I stay in the small town interior, while I'm dating Ana Maria, a town called Piraju, I stayed with a family who were all Lebanese descent. We party all night until 1, 3 in the morning. By the time you come home, there's warm coffee in the thermos, the typical bakery along with the dates. The Lebanese hospitality, again, comes along with the hug, the kisses, the embraces, and the next afternoon, we go to the river club, come back and party in the late evening again. But it's a very confined, there'll be another story for me to tell you about how this living experience in Brazil and in the walking and the pracinha, all that had given me a much rich reading when we're talking about the days of the Spaniards, about the nobles in the warm days wearing Chinese silk on horsebacks and parading in front of the public place, basically showing that I don't have to work, we don't have to work. I'm from the upper class. There are many stories, all the way from the Don Quixote de la Mancha of the Spanish book, from Cervantes to all the other novels, and visual with cinema. It adds to all the learning about the Portuguese Iberia, the Spanish Iberia, the Andalucia, the whole Arabic. What is most Arabic? What is Mudéjara? Who are the conversos? Another ethnic minority, in my admiration about Toledo, is like, God, I lived in Toledo because I lived in São Paulo, including the disbanded famous painter in a very gloomy expressions, El Greco. Well, El Greco meaning the Greek. El Greco is from Greece. However, the court of Spain disliked his painting. Then he end up staying in Toledo. But his paintings I have always admired. And so, but the cultural experience, clusters of a culture from São Paulo, had given me another dimensionality when I visited Toledo, when I visited Barcelona, when I visited Madrid, and my coexisting with other friends in Peru, in Mexico. And this enclaves, these zones, these cultural zones, I put that into the cultural sphere. So São Paulo is enormously rich. The young ladies we got out dated together from Denmark, my best friend Ivan Zmuk, who gave up actually his positioning on the running on this competition of the breaststroke. I took it to the São Paulo state record. Basically, is a Brazilian record. The give and take, and the singing in the opening window in the car, singing all the Beatles songs, Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds. Somebody tell me, no, there's LSD. Well, I had no idea what even LSD represent at that age, the part of the innocence. But São Paulo, where we're using a little Volkswagen, beep beep to the cops, and in the 1 o'clock, challenge them to a race, going from Avenida Paulista all the way down to Jardim Europa, Iguatemi, or going through the Praça, going to Parque Ibirapuera, Avenida Brasil. There's no vehicles on the road. And one of the small places of hi-fi that we drink most for the Americans and the predominantly Americans is called Little Balco Hi-Fi, 3 blocks down from Avenida Paulista. I think near Itu or Franca, cross streets. Life is very rich. Life is very rich where I see whoever we were, we did not have to change. We are not to make any adaptation. And yet in all these cultural enclaves, later on, the Cantonese were already there, that people from Taiwan, people from Hong Kong, people from other parts of China, and meeting up with the many group of the ethnic Jews, in my case, with the Club Hebraica, and then you met your neighbors, the German. What I have enjoyed the most is that there was no imposition. There were not people eyeing you with a certain kind of racial or racist state. Then people say, well, because you don't experience that, because you're not in a different category or social strata. But I lived in my boarding school. I loved my boarding school. I stayed with my best friend's house in Jacareí, Durval César Picudo, who had clocked me, helped me getting up 6 a.m. before people get up. I practiced on the irregular pool for 90 days, 7 days a week. And that's how I got my record in June 1964. When I went to Durval's home in Jacareí, I was absolutely amazed at the degree of the cleanliness, the orderly, and the affection. He's a single child by his mother and by his father. And only at the evening, I start to notice the floor, the house floor was not have any layers. It's just swept up dirt. Eventually, I see more of this kind of house into other farming community in our own different operations in the mining projects. But the simplicity and along with the genuine affectionate attitude, good food, caring, giving, all the kisses and all the embraces. That's how much I remember Brazil by. And even talk about Rua Augusta, back to this beautiful affluent zone of Brazil. We were I even have credit the Italian friends later on. Some of the Italian lady finally told me, said, Paul, remember, we talk about sins and gluttony and whatnot. I said, vanity should never be a sin. I'm saying this is because when I'm going back to São Paulo, looking to some of the windows, shopping with other friends, we don't shop, we just look around the window. When I look at the brand, Spinelli, oh God, Spinelli had their store just about, I would say, about a mile down, going on my street, who is Estados Unidos, or the United States street, to Pamplona. Or the street going up the hill to the Paulista is basically by hill. And Augusta, and then Nove de Julio, and one by one, Padre João Manuel, and going the other side of Nove de Julio, a street called Pamplona, Spain. That's where the shoe store started with a couple of brothers. We were buying shoes with limited money, what we can. 1 pair, 2 pairs. We were the pioneers. I never forgot the one time they measured my shoes. I had a pair of black. Then I saw 2 more pairs. One is brown and one is a burgundy. I said, I did not order this. He said, Paul, thank you for you bringing all your friends. You are a fantastic promoter. You don't even know how many people came in from your club, from Hebraica, from Paulistano, Pinheiros. So they gave me 2 more pairs. And the more you wear our shoes with a different kind of stitching, different kind of design, the more business we'll have. We're being generous, but we're also being rewarded. So I never forget those kind words that I have received 2 extra pairs. And just on the way out, and they told me, we also realize you are being used as a model for Tergal, the Brazilian suit company. I just modeled for them for a couple of the exhibitions. And so the generosity of that time, you don't think about it. And many, many years later, 25 years later, you see the company name Spinelli become a great brand in São Paulo. So these are the things, is giving, continue giving, sharing, that I have received enormously from Brazil. What I became a champion swimmer in history. I'm not being shy to say this. There's 2 Chinese make history in Brazil in a different events. I was in the swimming, first ethnic Chinese beat the record in São Paulo State, 64, and the other, my dear friend, Bishop Song of the Bispo dos Índios. We met up eventually, 2008, in São Gabriel de Cachoeira, the northernmost town in Brazil, in the upper region of the Rio Negro, by the border of Venezuela. But what these kind of things, these events happen, were just so naturally with the give and take and the sharing of our internationality backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. And yes, people say, Paul, you're already fluent in English. I never thought I was fluent, but I was, yes, I was engaging in Portuguese and in Chinese and English. And my Mandarin is totally learned from the mixture of the people. My father never spoke fluent Mandarin because he's like Deng Xiaoping, like Mao Zedong, they all speak with a regional accent. So he spoke his Chinese is almost like already a mescla, a mix of the language from Zhejiang, from Yuyao, from the home of Wang Yangming. But in Shanghai, the rest speak Shanghai. My 2 sisters command the best, the most fluent Shanghai language. And my mother speak the language from Guangxi. And they also speak then what they call the Mandarin, the official language of China, called Guangdong Cantonese, called Gunhua. And the language coming from the painting, the Zhang Daqian, close state-wise with Guangxi, with the region. By listening to the language of Mandarin speaking from Taiwan, from England, from my father, from my mother, and from the friends from the different dialects, from Chinese from Thailand, Chinese from Burma, and this is where my current Mandarin, Putonghua. Yes, one of these days I will be speaking, doing a video in Putonghua. I'm not shy about where I have my quote unquote my margin of errors in the pronunciation, but I speak fluently when I go to China. I don't hold back. But I have yet command a video to speak in Mandarin. But anyway, this is just the beginning of series of the cultural zones, the cultural ambience, and the cultural sphere about Brazil. Then I can talk about in the same cultural sphere about my boarding school years in Lorena, and that give and take, and the accelerated learning, where the school had put me, amplify my curiosity about all Brazil and about all the Brazilian indigenous. And 17, I wanted to join the seminary school in Campinas, Liceu Coração de Jesus, but end up not going because my mother said, no, women can, but not boys. So I end up coming back to São Paulo, eventually São Paulo, to the University Wisconsin, the Platteville here. And that will be the other episode. But I'm glad I opened up this cultural spheres, and I hope there will be other people can talk about their background. You can talk about your experience in Hispanic world in Brooklyn, in any city, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. And this will be part of my theme, but continue linked to the pedagogy of conscience and the psychology round and square, and then the 3 C's, and all together under the first start of the CCI Cross-Cultural Institute. I'm still forming this entity. It's not a monopoly. It's not I'm not dictating, but I think open these cultural spheres allow us to link in the future coming up called the Spatial Web, but still a part of the contribution to education, to the greater learning in the sharing of my knowledge as well as my ignorance. Because today, nobody can afford to be ignorant, because the formation of the openbooks.ai will allow one global book where the insert by participants to critique, to comment, to add, to subtract, or to challenge the content. That openbooks.ai is the system that can is the educational blockchain. So for those who cherish open learning, who cherish storytelling in its widest context, will find openbooks.ai to become a very good tool. And we all can learn from each other. Thank you for your time. Gustavo.